Within the past few years, there has been a revival to the vampire genre of film. Not specifically the horror genre, there have been many different types of film that use vampires to enhance their storytelling. Whether it's a more action-based movie, maybe it has more of a comedic tone, or even if it's the classic take on vampires like the remake of Nosferatu from 2024, all sorts of movies are helping revitalize the vampire genre. With all of this vampire content coming out, it got me thinking about what the best depiction of vampires is. For me, it's 30 Days of Night from 2007, directed by David Slade. I know that this was a comic book miniseries before it was a film, but I'm just going to focus on the film. I love this movie overall. It has a lot of amazing things going for it, but I'm just going to talk about the antagonist today. Hopefully in the future, I will make a video about the whole movie. Something that's really cool about 30 Days of Night is it came out during the postmodern predatory vampire era. Quite the mouthful. Basically, what that is starting in about the 1980s, vampires got a different perspective put on them. Instead of being monstrous creatures, they were depicted more so human, and there was kind of two camps that they would live in. Either they would be a charming, mysterious, wealthy, nobleman-esque figure, or they would be more so the loner, outsider, rebellious figure. So 30 Days of Night reverts back to almost the origins of vampires being seen as these beastly threats that are extremely violent and ruthless. To give a quick synopsis of the movie, it takes place in Barrow, Alaska, the northernmost town in the US. It is the day that the 30-day-long polar night begins, so basically it's going to be night for 30 days straight. And during the day, the local sheriff and townspeople start having weird sabotage-like events happen. And then from there, we kind of see what unfolds over the next 29 nights. This movie has a, in my opinion, very special depiction of vampires. I have yet to watch a movie that comes anywhere close to this, but I'm not a huge vampire fan. I grew up when Twilight was being released, and I'm pretty sure that kind of soured the image of vampires and werewolves in my mind at that time. But when it comes to vampires, I think 30 Days of Night absolutely nails it. These vampires are unlike any other I have seen. When I say that they're predatory vampires, what that means is there's not a lot of romance or lust attached with these vampires. Unlike previous depictions that paint vampires as more as a romantic, sophisticated character, in this movie, they are not that at all. They're violent, visceral, and horrifying to look at. There's no elegance, grace, or romance used in the tactics of these vampires. They're very animalistic, not in the sense that they can turn into bats or they share physical attributes with bats, more so in the sense that the way they hunt and take out prey is very animalistic. Whether it's a direct attack that no one would have a chance of surviving, the vampires stalking their prey, and then there's also moments in the film where the vampires use surviving people as bait to lure out others. And then there's also a couple of scenes where it looks like the vampires kind of toy with their prey before taking them out. And that's just a lot of psychological horror. These vampires have a very specific look, and I just love that. I know that a lot of people are a fan of the pretty boy Edward Cullen kind of vampire, but I think these guys look so intimidating. What truly makes these vampires terrifying is the idea of a ancient species evolving to the point of filling a niche predatory group. They have extremely specialized abilities and have been around for at least hundreds of years. Knowing that they've had time to evolve and have just kept specializing in their niche, they have become the apex predator, and humans have been knocked down the food chain. There's kind of just a inherently instinctual fear of that. especially in the modern era where we all live very comfortably and everybody is more or less safe. You have your daily routine, you have everything at the touch of your fingers nowadays. Even back in 2007, the idea of an ancient species coming into a modern town, using sabotage against them to get them where they want them, and then having their way with them, pretty scary. Director David Slade and screenplay writer Steve Nile, who is also the co-creator of the 30 Days of Night comic book miniseries, had a very clear vision on what they wanted these vampires to be. On the surface, these vampires have a very demonic / alien look without straying too far from looking not like a human. They have these shark-like teeth. Basically, they went from having 2 fangs to just filling their whole mouth with fangs. And this is a evolutionary thing, I'm guessing, because having just all fangs in your mouth would allow you to take out bigger, cleaner chunks of your prey. It kind of reminds me of, it's like the cookie cutter shark or fish or something like that. It's literally a marine animal that basically takes chunks out of other marine life, so very similar to these vampires. They also have all black irises, which causes them to have a very demonic alien look. The reason why they have all blacked out eyes is because that will allow more light to get into their eye in dark settings, allowing them to see their prey better at night. They kind of just have the generic, general pale gray skin tone, but they have these claw-like fingernails. They kind of just look like overgrown cat claws, but these are very clearly good for slashing and ripping, especially throats. On the surface, these are very intimidating creatures. They still look for the most part human, but for some reason, some of the vampires just look extremely alien to me, which is kind of cool, but sometimes I'll see a shot from the film and I'm like, whoa. Below the surface of these vampires are highly intelligent creatures. Right at the beginning of the film, we see a stranger staring at a ship before walking the snowy hills towards Barrow. We later find out that this man was sent by the vampires to start sabotaging the town. I'm assuming they made him some kind of promise, but were actually just manipulating him, and they end up betraying him after his work is done. The vampires also use hunting strategies that indicate intelligence, such as using other prey to lure out more prey, ambushing their prey, as well as stalking them. This is a very intelligent species. They have been around for hundreds of years, and part of that is reflected in the language they speak. What's really cool is this language was specifically made for these vampires in 30 Days of Night. I believe they used a linguistics professor from a university, and they wanted it based off of tribal languages, so very simple and straight to the point, and they wanted clicking consonants involved as well. Hearing this ancient language kind of sends a chill down my spine because it really doesn't sound like anything you've heard before, and I mean, vampires like these have never really been seen before, so it makes sense. Besides all those specific traits I just pointed out, they also have the generic super strength, super speed, all that fun stuff that kind of just comes with vampires. But overall, these guys are extremely lethal. What's really cool is a lot of the traits that these vampires have, both physically and more so mentally, are very similar to historical accounts of vampires from the southeastern Europe / Balkan area. In accounts from those areas about vampires, they mention group hunting, killing whole communities, and just being a very strategic and intelligent predator. There are some other homages in this film to the southeastern Europe / Balkan history of vampires, and I'll get back into that in just a moment. I just really think that these guys are probably the most horrific depiction of vampires. They aren't quite beastly like some other depictions that show them as more of a bat-like creature, but they're also not quite fully human like what you see in Interview with a Vampire or the Twilight series. These guys are a perfect in between where it kind of lands in the uncanny valley a little bit, where you can't tell if it's quite human from a distance. I just think this is a truly informed and masterful take on vampires with a very clear vision. When doing research, I watched some behind the scenes of the making of 30 Days of Night. Watching David Slade instruct the vampire actors, he just gave them exactly what he wanted, and he coached them and had them practice their movements, their screeches, every single element that would be shown, and I think it's cool how much care went into these vampires. Now, it's not totally hopeless for the people in 30 Days of Night, because luckily these extremely terrifying vampires are able to be killed. The best form is removing the head, decapitation, but it seems like general mutilation that nobody, supernatural or not, could really come back from. These vampires are also allergic to UV light, and that is one of the defenses used in the movie, which is a pretty cool scene. So not a lot of ways to take these guys out, but you do have just a couple of options. Circling back to these vampires being inspired by Southeastern European / Balkan historical accounts of vampires, I have a theory on possibly the history of these vampires, or at least where they recently traveled from. So in the film, we know that the vampires arrive via a ship to Barrow. The only country close enough that you could use a ship to travel to Barrow, especially during winter, would be Russia. Before we're even really introduced to our vampire crew, we do see the first couple of attacks take place. The very first attack we see is them dismembering a character. And then later on, when the local sheriff is investigating all the strange sabotages happening, we see that dismembered character's head placed on a wooden stake. Shortly after that, we see what will come to know as the head vampire use a fire stoker to impale a man. And to get a little bit more into the leader of our vampire gang, his name is Marlowe. And I believe he's the oldest vampire, not only based on his appearance, but he seems to be the one giving instructions and pep talks. If he feels like there's danger lurking, he will send one of his vampire minions to go investigate or do whatever bidding needs to be done. So he seems to be the leader of the group. He also has a line of dialogue when the vampires are kind of starting to lose the fight a little bit. And he mentions how they've been around for centuries, so hundreds of years. Marlowe also has the ability to recognize a true threat to the vampires. So the local sheriff, Eben, in the film is recognized by Marlowe many times as someone who will fight back. And I feel like this kind of indicates Marlowe has either been in a similar position or he's observed a lot of violence in war. And overall, all of these vampires are extremely brutal. It's not just Marlowe. All of them have very frenzy killing. They use a lot of strategy. They're a very intelligent group. And on top of being intelligent, none of these vampires look too alike, and with all the diversity in the group, you can assume most likely Marlowe had traveled through neighboring countries of what area he originates from, and I think Marlowe comes from the area of Romania, also known as Wallachia, back in the 15th century. Now, I know what you're thinking. You point out all these things. How are you going to tie it all together? Well, there is a little-known historical figure named Vlad the Impaler, who ruled in Wallachia 3 different times during the 15th century. And like I said, that would be modern Romania. Vlad's last name was Dracul, which in medieval Romanian means dragon, and in more modern Romanian it means the devil. So you can kind of assume what impression Vlad left on the world. During Vlad's reign, he was a very cruel person. He was very cruel to his enemies and anyone that betrayed him, And one of his favorite ways to punish people was to have them impaled on wooden stakes. Now, his evil showmanship caused a lot of rumors to spread from those that did not support him and even those that did support him. One of the infamous rumors being that he had dipped bread into the blood of an impaled victim, then consumed it. Vlad the Impaler is kind of like a foundational block in the history and interpretation of vampires. In terms of Southeastern European / Balkan vampire history, Vlad the Impaler is 100% one of the biggest inspirations to that folklore. Now, tying this back in with the vampires from 30 Days of Night, Marlowe, the leader, like I said, is clearly the oldest and claims that he, as well as the others, have been around for centuries. That could mean 200 years, that could mean 500 years. Based off of how he talks about it, we can kind of place it in the 15th century, which at the time of 30 Days of Night coming out would have been roughly, that would have been a little under 600 years, maybe closer to 500 years beforehand. We can kind of assume that at least Marlowe was either alive during Vlad the Impaler's rule or maybe shortly after his rule, and Marlowe happened to be turned by one of the many vampires in Wallachia at that time. Now, like I said, this is just a fun little theory I have. I think it'd be really cool if these vampires have been around and they confirmed the rumors that Vlad the Impaler was a vampire and he was turning people that would then go on to continue to survive and evolve the species into an apex predator. Like I said, melting history and film together can be a difficult task. And when you add horror into the mix, I feel like it can make it an even muddier area. If my theory is true and these vampires are either inspired by Vlad the Impaler or there is some lore about these vampires connected to him, I think they did a great job of implementing a lot of subtle nods to that history within the film. Overall, these vampires, whether they're attached to Vlad the Impaler or not, are extremely intriguing. I, like I said, have yet to see a vampire similar to these guys, and with the direction that the vampire genre is heading, I'm not sure we'll ever get it again. Let me know what you guys think about this theory, whether it seems to be sound or if I'm being crazy and drawing comparisons that aren't truly there. Let me know what you think, and I will see you guys in the next one.